Let's see who's coming. Admit all. Admit all. Admit all. All right, folks. Looks like there's only, well, there's Riaz. He's coming. Hossein wants a little bit of a break from this kind of material. Let's see who is. It's only 4 people today. So what we were going to do is we were just going to review these chapters 5 and 6 in terms of questions and issues that you might have about them, so we can discuss them. So whoever wants to take center stage first, it's all yours. Hassan, Jeff, Riaz.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind starting. How are you doing today?
Good. Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you for asking. So my question sort of corresponds to chapter 5. Nothing in the comments, just in the body.
Mhm.
So he talks about the first intellect, um, encompassing every universal of the world's realities,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And including in this is the name of the merciful.
All right, man.
And yeah, and the impression I was getting from Ibn Arabi is that the breath of the merciful is sort of what brings creation into being. So I was thinking, okay, the breath of the merciful will bring creation into being, but then he sort of talks about the universal soul as being the universal world,
Mhm.
where the that brings the particulars of the first intellect
That's
into
that's
being.
a that's a very valid point. There's a couple of synonymous things going on here. This is correct. So the universal intellect, as I've kind of been saying again and again, is the B. That is the universal, that is the will. So if we say universal intellect or if we say universal will, it's exactly the same thing, right? That is the first emergent or the first cause from the Godhead, right? So that is the be itself. Now, it is at the level of which the particularizations occur that we call the level of the universal soul, and that is the level of the volition, the irada. So universal will is analogous to the universal intellect, al-aql al-awal, and then the next stage, the volition, the irada, that is the level of the universal soul, al-nafs al-kulliyat, and that is the volition in the irada, where you have the particular, so that is the universal soul is the level at which, and it is. So the will is B, and it is the universal soul. Intellect and universal soul.
Okay, I see. And I guess you could sort of say that the volition is sort of like the compassionate in a sense is kind of like the exhalation of the breath of the merciful in a way.
Yes and no. Let's put it this way: the initial exhalation that is completely indiscriminate, right? So that is the level of where the universals, the kulliyat of everything are generated out of the universal intellect in their in their intelligible substrates. Once we come to the level of the universal soul, that is where you can say that there is not a um, inhalation, but it is the stop in a sense. So the exhalation has been made, all the contents have poured out of God, right? And then they are particularized, and you can kind of argue this is the kind of the pause in the breath.
Okay, cool. So it's kind of like I guess, the sublimation almost of the
Yes,
breath in a sense.
exactly. Yeah, good way to put it. Yeah. Very good way to put it. Sublimation. And then we have even a level after that, after the universal soul, we have the level of the universal nature, right? And this is, as if you recall from our reading of the fusus al-hikam, that is the level at which Ibn Arabi claims that the dualism, that the taint of nature is that dualism. We don't have any thanawiya, we don't have any dualism until that point. So even in their differentiated states at the level of the universal soul, there is still not that kind of, sharp dualism that we find between subject and object. That only occurs at the level even below the universal soul, which is the universal nature, where we are.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And to add to that, the correspondence which was made in the book, that Ar-Rahman corresponds to the universal intellect, Ar-Rahim to universal soul, but Allah, the name Allah before this to Insan Kamil, who is capable of both perceiving the universals and the particulars, correct?
Yes. Or another way to put it, which is also, this is the way that it is put, sometimes without even coming to the Insan al-Kamil, because the Insan al-Kamil is the container of it all. So at the level of the human. So it is what to the world of phenomena is to the world of the phenomena of duality in the material world. The Insan al-Kamil stands in the same kind of analogous, not equal, but analogous position that the Godhead stands towards everything below it in that respect. So here's another way to put it is that if we take the 4 words of the Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, the Bism in the name of is representative of the ipseity itself, right? Why? Because at this point it is the one naming, not the one named, right? Allah would be the level of the Wahidiyya itself at its principle. And then we get the Wahidiyya in its unfoldment in the stage of its will. So it's Mashiach, that would be Ar-Rahman, that then spits out the universal contents of everything indiscriminately. And then the Rahim is the level of the universal soul that is now determining everything into its particularities or individuations.
Okay. The next one, in page 139, it is the last paragraph. The books that have been mentioned are the original divine books. As for their branches, they are the rest of existence, consisting of the intellect, soul, spiritual and bodily powers, and so on. For they inscribe the properties of the entities, either entirely or in part, in summary or in detail. The list there.
Go ahead.
The last sentence, the list thereof is the inscription of its own properties, God knows best.
This is such an important point. It's something that is implied in Ibn Arabi, but never explicitly articulated. Let me just give you the reason why that is. So in the 7 creative attributive imprints, we have the 7 as the will or the primal will to be, then which is al-mashiyah, then al-irada, which you can also translate as the intentional volition emerging from the primal will to be, then the qadar, or the measure, decree, determination of that thing, of that original primal will to be, then the qada, which is the judgment, execution, authorization of that primal will to be, then flows from that al-imda, the confirmation, irrevocability, realization of that primal will to be. From that, then emerges al-ajal, the appointed time of that primal will to be, and then the final is al-kitab. Al-kitab, now we can take the al-kitab as book, just the literal meaning of it, or we can take it as an inscription or the record of that thing, the final cause of that primal will to be. So this is why he's saying this, which is very much taken directly from glosses of those hadith that we have in Kulaini about these 7 creative attributive introverts. As you saw, and in particular in this chapter, Qaysari is beginning to bring forth some of his understanding of the Shia hadith and the Shia understanding of a lot of these issues, which until him, and until his teacher Kashani, who was a Shiite, these issues were not so explicitly articulated in the context of the Akbarian doctrine of Ibn Arabi until these guys. And then once he articulated, not too long after him, Sayyid Haydar al-Muli just ran with all of this and started reinterpreting the entire theosophy of Ibn Arabi through the lens of Shiism. But here you see that this is exactly what he's doing. So that final paragraph, Ma dhukira min kutab innama hiya usul al-kutub al-ilahiyya, this is basically a gloss, a commentary on what that final 7th attribute of imprinting is about, what it means in the process of the unfolding of the primal will to be, the divine will.
Because he makes the difference between usul and furua, the
Yes.
ummahat and the
Yeah.
Okay.
And according to Ibn Arabi, this is very interesting. According to Ibn Arabi himself, let me just get this. He claims in one place, although this changes from one chapter of the Futuhat to another, he claims that the final in the ummahat of the names is al-muqsid, the equitable, right? Which is attached to justice, which is very similar to the way that the Shiite sources deal with the 6 divine names, or the 7 if you count Hu. But the 5th name in the names, the 6 names that we have that are descriptive of the essence, is Adl, the just, right? Here, what's happening is that the final name, according to the school of Ibn Arabi, is Muqsid. Now, the way I have dealt with this question, because there's a lot of contradiction and debate in the various sources about the difference between justice and equity, between the name Adl and the name Muqsid. The way I have resolved this question is to say that Adl is the universal balance, right? And Qist, equity, is its instantiation. So when we talk, you cannot have Qist, you cannot have equity without justice, without Adl, right? So in other words, we can say that Qist and the name al-Muqsid, the equitable, is basically the particular instantiation of justice itself. That's the way I resolve this question in my own writing. But this is an important point, because as the final 7th of the mother names in Ibn Arabi, that then ties it with book, according to this gloss that we just got, because it's the final imprint. And so this kind of then makes you understand how this school of Ibn Arabi itself is dealing with this question, what their whole thinking about all of this is.
The next one, which I want to gloss little bit on it is page 143. So, it is when discuss the unity between knowledge, knower, and known. It is the third paragraph from the top to the bottom. The distinction in the mind between the knower and the known doesn't negate existential unity. Just as rays of the sun during the day or on a moonlit night are one, even to the mind judges the light of the sun or the moon to be other than the light of the star. The essential unity of knowledge, knower, and known is only the unity of attributes, names, and entities in God and nothing else. But here I think that it would be better analogy if we say what was in the Suhrawardi treatise about the sun, which is the tuba tree, and the simurgs, the race, which proceeds from the tuba tree. And then the question, is the simurg only one? And the answer that in every single moment there is a simurg which proceeds from the tuba tree to the earth. And now if we compare the death birds, simurg, one to other, they are different things. But if we have in mind their origin, the tuba tree, in it they are one and the same.
Yeah, another way to put this is that if we use Aristotelian categories, we can say that the genus and species are the same. It is also by virtue of the fact that there's one dying and but one being reborn after it that there's a differentia occurring. But differentia is a kind of accident, right? So it is a completely secondary intelligence. It's something that just happens. But the substrate on both tiers, whether at the level of genus and species, is exactly the same. So this may be reread from that angle into what this is saying, right? The essential unity, he's saying, of knowledge, knower, and the known is only the unity of attributes, names, and entities in God and nothing else. So he's saying that the genus and the species are the two primary universals that are a unified body, right? That even the difference that emerges as a result of a reborn of an entity coming back, not as the former form of it, but in another form of is incidental.
And the other thing, because I think the last sentence is little bit misleadingly translated. The Arabic وأصل اتحاد المعلومات بالعلم والعالم إنما هو اتحاد الصفات والأسماء والأعيان بالحق لا غير. But the virtue by which this unity between the knower and the known and knowledge exists in us and everything which is capable of intellection is by virtue the unity between the attributes and names, the original unity between attribute and names which exists in God. And then everything, the other unity, it is the shadow of the unity which happens between the Godhead and its names and attributes.
In other words, if you want to map it out by Aristotle's categories, genus and species belong to principle, right? Accident and differentia belong to other than principle. So this is what he's put his hand on. Because, as you just read, إنما هو اتحاد الصفات والأسماء والأعيان بالحق ولا غير. Um, they're occurring inside the real. These principles, these names, these essences. This is why I don't like the word entities when the ayan is used, because it misleads us into thinking of concrete particulars when that's not what it means. So the principle of this, the genus and the species of this, at its substrate is something that is within the universe. It is intelligible within the mind of God. So its manifestation as in its wujud al-aini, in its, concrete manifestation, is the accident of that thing. And it's differentia simultaneous.
Okay. The next one, the same page. It is the paragraph between the last one. Man, for his being the replica of the great world, contains all the realities in it, and they are identical with him in one respect, for the reasons mentioned above. Nothing veils him from them except the elemental plane. Thus, to the extent the veils are removed, realities are manifested in him, so that his state concerning the objects of his knowledge is like that of the first intellect.
Yeah.
Here, the thing which takes my attention, it is because of
And
the
look what he says.
resemblance.
Look what he says in the last paragraph. That is a key one. The paragraph right after what you just read. In actuality, bal fil tahqiq, his knowledge is also active with respect to his station, meaning the spirit, and passive from another perspective, which is what I said earlier. In fact, it is more fitting to describe him as having active knowledge than the first intellect, because he is the vicegerent and governs all the world. So what did I say? I said that as the final cause of a process that begins with the ipsiety, right? It ends in the insan kamel, such that in the insan kamel is to the world of phenomena what the ipsiety of the Godhead is in relation to the absolute worlds.
Yes, that is an important point. The active creative knowledge which we have, but I wanted to comment it from another viewpoint. That because we already, because the resemblance and accordance which is between us and everything which exists, we have in ourselves the realities of everything. But because the veil which exists in us, not in every moment we have access to everything which is in us, which just recalled me the manner of the Plato dialogues, that the learning process is in actuality remembering
Yeah,
which is
and then this is,
of what
yeah,
already in
this,
us. uh, Everything is in us. And also another, it is said, that is hadith, إنما بعثنا لنثير على دفائن العقول, that the only purpose for which we, the Prophet, was sent to humanity, to be cause that the humans, the persons, they remember that which is already buried deep in their intellects.
yeah,
That's the real process of dhikr.
yes, recognition is anamnesis. Yeah, that's exactly what Plato says in Meno. Yeah, yep. Very much so. Very much so. Good spotting. That's a good hadith to cite. So this is the five divine presence. Did you have anything to say about the following one, the imagine a world? Because we were going to read all that as well.
Uh, y- also have two notes on it. The first one, just to see, is it, yes, in the imaginal world, page 149. It is the second paragraph. Uh, the essence, should I read it or just say the to stress on? Okay, it is good paragraph. Let's. Every single meaning or spirit has an imaginal form, or put in another word, his own delimited imagination. Every single meaning or spirit has an imaginal form corresponding to its perfections, since each of them has a share in the divine name, the manifest. For that reason, a sound narration relates the prophet, peace and blessings upon him, saw Jibril, upon him be peace, at the loud tree with 600 wings. And also, Jibril enters the river of life every morning and evening, and
Whoops.
Almighty creates an infinite number of angels from every drop. This imaginal world contains the throne, arch, the pedestal, kursi, the seven heavens and earth, and all the angels contained therein and others. So the idea being that uh, every abstract idea which exists in the noetic world, although it is besides any limits of time, space, form, matter, and so on, nevertheless, it has its representation by imaginal form, has its representation. That's for me the crucial point, because this representation of their ideas in the level of imagination with their forms, it is a link which makes possible the contact or the berzech, the common ground between the physical material world in which we are and the noetic world of pure intellects, rational souls, and every other meanings and idea which exist. And that is the basis which makes possible divine revelation to exist at all. That all the mithal, and so on, which are given in the Quran, or in the same manner what we read in the visionary tales of Suhravardi and so on, the purpose is that we enter this imaginal world by the help of these imaginal forms, and then we can proceed and make the connection with the
Higher world.
upper.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good way to put it. Very good way to put it. Yes.
That is, in simple words, that it is the basis both of the process of tenzil, divine revelation, and the will, the way back to the
Yeah. To the
source.
principle, to the source. Yeah. 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 Very good way to put it. But look at it also this way. Remember what Mullah Sadra told us about the reality of the soul and how it creates this reality for itself. So let's take these two paragraphs. The prophet sees Jephthah, sees Gabriel at the low tree, the Sidratul Muntaha, with 600 wings, right? And also, Gabriel enters the river of life every morning and evening and leaves, flapping his wings. Then God Almighty creates an infinite number of angels from every drop. This is already just amazingly packed with so much symbolism here. at what it's saying from from one angle. This is the vision of the prophet himself about his own reality, right? Since just like with Suhrawardi, where Gabriel is the alter ego of Suhrawardi as the active intellect, the Gnostics have always taken Gabriel as the alter ego of the prophet himself, right? So the number 600 itself is important because it is it is the numerical value of the letter Cha, right? And Cha is the letter of what? The name Al-Khabir, the first letter of it, the well-informed. So Gabriel enters the river of life every morning. Now, the river of life and the water of life are synonymous. And as we learn, the space of the water of life is dark. It is a pitch black darkness. So here's the contrast of the imagery. Gabriel enters the river of life every morning. Morning represents the renewal of everything. From every morning is the renewal of the night. That was the closing of the day before, right? So, and then leaves in the evening, every morning and evening. So at the renewal of every day and at the midpoint of every day, Gabriel, the alter ego of the prophet, the celestial angelophanic consciousness of the prophet himself, enters the water, the pitch black waters of life in the river of life, and flapping the wings, right? With the wings representing the vehicle of the ascent to God, right? Out of this drops 600 angels, right? To the numerical value of the first letter of Khabir, meaning that every thought that the prophet is having is a modality of divine information or revelation, right? From his own celestial, from his own mithali substance. This is dropping, right? So going back to what we read before in the previous chapter, so we can take the Gabriel element of the higher consciousness of the prophet as being his will, his Mashiach, his intellect, okay? That then when it steps into the river of life, the river of life itself being the process of the nafas al-rahmaniyah itself in its in its expanded exhalation, in a sense, right? And then once he emerges in the morning and in the evening, each time he walks into that river, that is the process of the yakun that is occurring, right? Through these wigs, 600, are falling out of it. So this is one way that you can look at this. Because in this imaginary world, as he says, the throne, the arsh, the pedestal, the kursi, and the seven heavens, and earths, and all the angels therein are contained in it. So it is within his own soul, and the soul, the locus of the soul in this world right now, as well as in the akhirah, is in the alam mithal, whether in its limited or unlimited khayali trajectory. But with the prophet, we can say that in that celestial function that he inhabits within himself as the insan kamil, that he is, whatever he imagines within his own soul occurs at the level of the ultimate khiyal, the khiyal al-mutlaq.
Uh, very, I was almost forgot to comment on this hadith, which are the beautiful example of. It was said in the same chapter something else, but if we compare the richness, the enormous dimension and vast space of the imaginal world to the physical world, it is like an endless space, an endless desert compared just to a little ring. And here, this image is that when Jibril comes out from the river of life, from every drop which falls from his wings, another angel is created. There are numerous hadiths in this same genre. That, that, for example, in other hadiths, that where, for example, person makes some good deed or zikr or salawat or something else, angel is created with 70,000 heads, which has 70,000 faces, which has 70,000 tongues, and so on and so forth. Uh, Many of the hadith muhaddisun criticizers, they are just dismissing this hadith as fabrications because it seems just like a fantasy.
Yeah.
But they miss exactly this point. Thus, it is not fabrication. They are real symbolism, but their big numbers, this richness, represent exactly the superiority, the vastness of imaginal world compared to the physical world.
Yeah, because over there, all of the linear laws of motion and physics that we understand in this world um, are gone. That realm operates by completely different laws. Um, and I've had this conversation with people who are even Muslims who've kind of been dismissive of the Irfani concept of the Alam al-Mithal. I asked them, I said, look, explain to me, why is it that in art, human beings are capable of producing forms and visions that are impossible to emulate per the physical laws of nature and physics? And they kind of stop for a while because they never consider this. Yeah. But then they in their own defense, they try to, well, but even the art, in its all of its forms is following the physical laws. I said, that's not what I'm arguing. The depiction in its overall picture defies the laws of physics. You take someone like Salvador Dali or similar surreal or similar kind of art, or even in the geometric forms that we find in Iranian Islamic art, like in the the domes of Isfahan or the tombs of some of these great saints like Shah Ni'matullah Ali, etc. And you look at this, yes, there are geometric forms that form patterns that are beyond the kind of conventional geometry. So you have to then explain it by another a kind of visionary geometry from the bigger picture. There is never an answer for this. There is never an adequate logical rebuttal to this argument. I'm not saying that the laws of physics are being suspended on one level, but yet an artist or even a musician is capable at even a moment to suspend some of these laws in terms of what they convey. Not in terms of how they have conveyed it, but in what they convey as the end product.
That's very good argument. And another one which I usually add, that for a person who is well versed with mathematics, who knows the infinite structures which are contained within the rank of the different kind of numbers, forms, and so on, this is also another open door to the world of imagination, which excellently represents this type of hadith.
So it's really, really a question, and this is what esotericism seeks to do in almost everything. The question is, something is true or false only based on the level at which it is being expressed. And so this is the reason why both exoteric religious people and also a lot of these atheists and whatnot who dismiss this sort of thing are kind of occurring on the same plane, because they're interpreting symbols at a literalist plane when they're not supposed to be interpreted. These are symbols that are occurring on a completely different plane altogether. So you have to be able to enter that plane to understand what these symbols even mean. So to take scripture literally as a literal historical text and argue that this is the truth of the matter is to miss the forest for the trees. And this is what religious fundamentalists do, and also what so-called scientific rationalists and atheists do. The scientific rationalists don't even accept that there is even another level beyond the literal, just as the religious fundamentalists.
Exactly on the spot. I accept that this both groups, they are equal for me.
Yeah,
The religious materialists and the atheists, they are just one and the same. Their thinking is exactly the same. The only difference, the religious people, they suppose as an axiom that there exists God. And that's it. But this God, he does not interfere at all in the world. Then, after declaring this axiom, everything in religion should be explained by a rationalism, by the laws of physics, and this kind, without leaving any space for the imaginal world and the other levels.
because the imagination, the imaginative world and the laws of the imagination erase this rationalism and take it to a higher logic. And unless you are an initiate, you cannot understand this higher logic, because it requires a level of perception. You must have basira. And if you don't have basira, then you cannot enter that level. And then the question becomes, well, how do you attain that basira? How do you get the insight, the vision, the kind of eyes of fire that Corban talked about? And then that becomes a whole other question in itself. But this is why it is very easy to dismiss the objections of both groups. One group has a very silly concept of spirit, very childish concept of spirit. The other one has a very flat notion of existence and will not admit, higher realms of contextual being, and that therein is the problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Sadie.
Sure,
That's were my.
sure thing. Jeff, did you want to say anything?
Um, I'm a little overwhelmed, and I haven't even quite finished with the chapter 6 yet. But just continuing from where you and Hassan left off on page 149,
Mhm.
I wonder then, like the very next paragraph, I wonder if you could gloss that. I know this is um, a commentary on Ibn Arabi's fusus, and so these names are relevant in that context. But I have a hard time with that for some reason. The second last paragraph on 149.
Mhm.
In light of this, the seeker grasps the nature of the prophet's ascent, Miraj,
Mhm.
and his witnessing of Adam on the first heaven. And of course, he's corresponding these to the seven planets or the seven realms or whatever. And so Adam on the first heaven, John, Yahya, and Jesus, Isa on the second, Joseph, Yusuf on the third, Enoch, Idris on the fourth, Aaron, Harun on the fifth, Moses, Musa on the sixth, and Ibrahim
On the
on the
same.
seventh.
Yeah.
Peace be upon them all. So I was wondering, could you help me with that?
Well, it's an extension of what I was saying before. These are, if we, forget about the issue of whether the hadith is authentic or inauthentic, but what these represent is that, and Corban touches on this in his Man of Light in Iranian Sufism. This was Muhammad's own inner voyage within his being through each of the prophets of his own being, his Miraj experience within himself in the imaginary,
Right.
rather
Right.
than literal,
No, exactly. So, like, I mean, everything that we're reading here, I hate to even say it because I'm not trying to take it out of an Islamic context, and especially like not even out of an Ibn Arabi-esque context. But I mean, everything is still applicable, even like if you've never read the Quran, right? If you're not familiar with the Islamic milieu, then that doesn't negate any of what we're reading
No,
here. I mean,
you
this,
could transpose all of these into another register altogether. You can make it a pagan one.
right, exactly.
Or
So
in fact,
that's
as a matter of fact, the one of the figures from the Mughal period that I'm extremely fascinated by is this Iranian Zoroastrian high priest, Hazar Kevan, who was kind of a Zoroastrian illuminationist. And he reinterpreted his own spiritual experiences per this very hadith with, ancient Iranian Mazdian and Zoroastrian registers completely. And he's got two treatises. One is called what is it called? It's called Mukashafat Azar Kevan, which was written on behalf of him. And in there, he has another poem. It's actually a poem, a very ecstatic poem where he's going through all of these celestial spheres. And the way that he explains it is he's using very Zoroastrian language. Never mind the fact that the Zoroastrians of the late Sasanian and early Islamic period looked at the seven planets very negatively. But once this template falls into the hands of illuminationized Zoroastrians of Safavid Iran and early Mughal India, they completely transpose all these registers for their own purposes. Where you have someone like Azad Kevan writing these ecstatic poems, almost rewriting this very hadith, but based on his own experience of what that means. So these register. This is what I've been saying, and what people from an esoteric approach to these sorts of questions are seeing. The linguistic and cultural registers of these sorts of experiences are basically expressions applicable to that particular culture and historical experience or religious, ecclesia, right?
right.
Um,
Yeah.
Beyond it, once we go beyond that linguistic, that three-dimensional, two-dimensional register of language and culture and history, these things are universal,
Right.
right? So a shaman from the Australian Aboriginal tradition will experience and articulate those ineffable experiences based on his own linguistic and cultural registers. Same with someone in the Amazon. Someone in China will do it in their own terms, and so on and so forth. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right there, this kills the exclusivist claim in terms of a particular religion or a form of a religion or whatnot being the exclusive truth. Especially since we're mapping out now, some scholars will have a problem with this in the academy. Others will, call it perennialism, which it is. But I think perennialism has a much older pedigree than Gainon and that crowd. And besides, Sohrawardi was a perennialist. So, but certain people will have a problem with it. Certain cultural anthropologists or contemporary critical phenomenologists will have a problem with it, where they take the language in a very reified sense and claim that no, every mystical experience is its own, self-contained cultural and linguistic world, which is, you can say that, but in the next sentence, you will then have to break it down. So then are you saying that mystical experiences only occur within culture and language? And if you're doing that, then you collapse your own explanation, and that experience is no longer mystical. It's something else.
Right.
So these are the sorts of objections that you usually meet with. But from my perspective, we can use a Christian context and explain and basically say the same thing using completely Christian registers. And so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's it's a work in esotericism, and yet it is presented systematically in a particular cultural context and historical, cultural, and linguistic, and very systematic. Like my mind, like I'm sure everybody's, wants to memorize everything in the details in terms of forming a comprehensive picture, in terms of like a ready-made system that once you learn the system, then you can just draw on your memory and
That's
pick out the
this
bits.
is why certain people get overloaded with this information. Okay. Um, these sorts of works, at least in the original context, not now where everything is being published, are not meant for people who are just going to cogitate their way through it. Right? These texts were designed for people on the path. I mean, Qaysari wasn't writing even for the Hawza, the seminary. He was writing for a Sufi milieu, with disciples that are already having practices and having certain experiences, even on a very preliminary level, so that then they can ground their experiences and their practices in a theoretical context. In other Sufi orders, the poetry of the founders of that order functioned to that end, such that, for example, Rumi's Masnavi was supposed to cater to a novice, or an intermediate student, although, there's stuff in the Masnavi that even addresses extremely advanced people, including teachers. So all of this was meant to ground the experience so that you have a theoretical, but also in the original Greek, denotation of theoria, right? Rather than getting you to just like endlessly pack your head with information and try to analyze and find contradictions, and you're just becoming a mental cerebral exercise. This is supposed to anchor you, this kind of stuff.
Right.
Also,
So it's,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, no, sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's very ironic or paradoxical in a sense that on the one hand, I'm getting like two different sensations going through it. On the one hand, it's liberating and enlightening, and on the other hand, it's overwhelming and confusing and cramping. You know what I mean? Like I feel like everything makes sense on one level, but on another level, everything's a struggle to
comprehend. Yeah, which is basically this whole tradition in a nutshell.
yeah.
That is why with someone like Qaysari, you engage with, you notice the things he's saying, the contradictions, you notice the stuff, you note it. But just always in the back of your mind, you need to understand that these texts are anchoring texts, right? They're kind of like the, how should I put it? They're kind of like the treats that you get from your come down. Okay. You've had a great experience, a big, opening, and then, you're offered some tea and cookies and cake. On an intellectual level, this is what this represents.
Right.
But it's not the experience itself. It's meant to anchor you and kind of give you some kind of language. Also, there's also a social context for this, is that Sufis at this stage, and this is around the end of the 13th century when Qaysari was active. By that time, the Sufi orders have become an alternative, a very important alternative milieu, class, etc., in Muslim societies. And so any estate that establishes itself in that sense spawns its own language. So just as the religious seminary would have the language of the theologians and the jurists, the Sufi orders, perforce during several centuries were spawning their own language and their own context and etc. Later on, these collapsed. But when the Sufi orders were strong, and we're talking here about the late Seljuk period, even starting to go into the Ottoman period. These guys had already established themselves as a serious contender to the power of the religious jurists, to the point that this particular school, beginning with Qunawi himself, these people not only were Sufis, but they also had degrees or ijazat, permissions to act as religious jurists. So they themselves were very deliberately trying to blur the line between the realm of the religious jurists and themselves, to the point that in the Ottoman period, and this became an issue later on for the Ottomans, is that the Sufi orders were issuing fatwas of their own, sometimes in contradiction to the explicit wording of fatwas that were coming from strict jurists. And then what you saw happening throughout the Ottoman period is that as the Ottoman royal family and the Ottoman elite got more closer to the Sufi orders, right? The Sheikh al-Islams, the highest religious dignitaries that the state would appoint, oftentimes were coming out of the Sufi orders themselves, such that the strict religious jurists with not a mystical bone in their body were very swiftly being more and more relegated to the margins during that Ottoman period. Yeah. They played it very well. The Sufi orders during the Ottoman period, it was one of those periods of Islamic history where they literally turned the tables on their former opponents, because before the Ottomans, there was always this tension between the Sufis and the religious jurists. You know, the jurists didn't like these Sufis. They considered them heretics. These jurists and theologians didn't have any mystical bones in their body. They didn't even understand half of the stuff these Sufis were saying. So there was this constant back and forth and you know, a lot of but once we get towards the first half of the Seljuk period, and then definitely into the Ottoman period, these Sufis, at least in Anatolia, turned the tables completely, just elevated itself. And this also then explains to you why, when you know, Ataturk came to power in Turkey, why he went after the Sufi orders, right? And because by that point, by the end of the Ottoman period, the Sufi orders had become the Islamic establishment.
Wow, that's awesome.
And that's why
And that-
Ottomans thrive. In my opinion, this is one of the reasons they thrived. And you know, for all their own weaknesses, the Ottoman period is one of those very few periods in Islamic history where you had at least several centuries of a continuous dynasty that offered at least its own population stability for a very sustained period of time until the end of the First World War.
Wow. Very interesting. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That sounds like I wish things could go back to that.
Well, a lot of people
go
look
back.
at that era with a lot of nostalgia. I mean, it had its problems, and it lasted for quite a while, almost close to 600 years. So by the time that we get into the first half of the 19th century, they're already, the Europeans were calling the Ottomans the sick man of Europe, and because they it was just the natural process of corruption in time, and they had become very powerful. The Ottoman were also not obscurantists. They had their eye on technology. So the Ottomans, until probably the beginning of the 19th century, amongst the Muslim powers, were probably the most technologically advanced of their peers, right? I mean, they came close several times to overrunning Europe, all the way to the gates of Vienna, which is an experience that some Europeans still look with some trauma. But I think had the Ottomans won and actually overrun the gates of Vienna, that the history of Europe would be very different, better.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I know we can't go back. It's funny I even said that in light of what was said last night in last night's session. We're always looking back to the, as Hassan said, the golden days or the good old days, some previous era that looks romantically better than the one we're stuck with now.
It was a good. It had its challenges. I mean, they weren't perfect. There was a lot of intrigue. I mean, some of the things I have read about the intrigues in the court, in the Ottoman harems, is just mind-boggling. Each sultan, once he came to power, would order most of the children spawned by his father in the harems to be killed because these were rivals.
Oh.
And even sometimes you would find a situation where a son that would inherit the throne would also inherit his father's women in the harem. And then there would be intrigues between these women, and the eunuchs had a lot of power inside this harem. It's just fascinating stuff. And then all of this stuff kind of corroded that society. But even still, in its heyday, they were extremely sophisticated. They set up an extremely sophisticated bureaucracy. They'd learned from their predecessors in the Muslim world. They learned from the Byzantines. So they incorporated some of the best models that you had in both the golden age of Islam and also what they had learned from the Europeans. So all of this was incorporated. The Ottomans were amongst the first of the armies that assimilated the most sophisticated weaponry. So they weren't, it wasn't just like with fighting with swords. I mean, the Ottomans were using cannons even before some of the Europeans were.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah,
Thank you. That's great. Nice bit of history there to
sure.
boot.
Yeah. I mean, when I say this as an Iranian, I mean, some Iranian is going to now jump down my throat and claim me as a traitor because the Ottomans and the Safavids spent 300 years fighting each other.
Oh, well, nobody's perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, just going back to the text, picking up from there, the next paragraph on, we'll just go to page 151. I just wanted to ask you if the letters, it's the first paragraph on page 151,
Mhm.
where it says, the sensible forms are shadows of those imaginal forms. For that reason, the Gnostic knows the state of a person by their form through the perspicacity of unveiling.
Mm.
I won't try to pronounce that.
الفراسة الكشفية.
Okay, as he mentions, be wary of the believer's perspicacity, for he sees with the light of God.
Mm.
He also said that the letters Kaf, Fa, and Ra
Mhm.
will be written on the forelocks of the Dajjal, but
But
none.
Kuf or kafir, actually, it should be kaf aleph fara. Kafir, the infidel. So this
That's
is
what I was going to ask you, and so that's related to the word kafir and
Yeah.
kufr even.
Yeah.
Okay,
Will be
all
written
right.
on the forelux, something that actually is supposed to be written on the temple of that John, his head. But none but the believer will be able to read it. God the Most High states their signs are on their faces from the effect of prostration concerning the people of paradise. Whereas regarding the people of the fire, he says the guilty will be known by their faces and taken by their forelocks and feet.
Right. That's like the mark of the beast, on the forehead,
Yeah,
basically.
pretty much the same thing. Yeah. But what he's saying is that the true believer, which in this case means the Gnostic, will be by virtue of their own advancement, they can see these sorts of states imaginally. Not that they're actually seeing
Yes,
mirrors on
yes.
somebody's forehead. Yeah,
Yeah, it wouldn't be perceptible to the average person.
no,
This would be a special kind of vision that would enable the Gnostic to see this,
exactly. Yeah.
supposedly. Okay, yeah. Those two chapters together, there's a lot to talk about, and I don't really have any questions formulated, except again, my mind just keeps wanting to systematize everything. So like I'm still stuck. I was going to go back and reread chapter 5, but I didn't get to that. I didn't do it yet. And one thing that stuck me was I actually read the introduction to it in the introduction of the book. So you don't have to go back. I have it copied and pasted over here. It says in the introduction that the fifth chapter describes the fundamental degrees of being, which are the five universal worlds. The five universal worlds. These divisions are also called the five divine presences, since the term presence indicates that God is present in all the worlds. And anyway, so here's the way my mind works. I wanted to enumerate the five and like,
Mhm.
draw the line between the universal world and the presence,
Sure.
and I didn't get to
There's a,
that yet.
there's an article by Chittick that actually should be there already, but if you can't find it, I can upload it again. It's called the Five Divine Presences, I think from Konawi to Jandi or Konawi to Qaysari. So basically, the five divine presences are one, Hahut, the realm of the Ipseity, right? That is the Ahadiyya, that is the exclusive oneness. Then we have the realm of the Lahut, the realm of the divinity proper. That is the place where all the names and attributes emerge. This could be taken as the realm of the Wahidiyya, the inclusive unity. Then we have the realm of the Jabarut. That is,
Mhm.
he translates this with a different technical word. I translate it as the Empyrean. That is the divine Empyrean, the realm of the archangelic intellects, the abstract intellect, which is very Mulasatra. That's the way he explains it. Then comes the realm of the Malakut. That is the angelic world proper, wherein within one of its sub-realms occurs the imaginal world. That is the kind of the isthmus between the spiritual and the material. After which comes Nasut, or the Mulk, the dominion, which is this material world, the totality of the whole physical universe, not just the earth.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, because I wanted to have that sorted out, and you just sorted it for me. And so thank you. That was one of my original questions, which I
So-
thought I was going to answer for myself, but I didn't do it.
Then this becomes a little bit within these five. You have these different hypostases, right? That the intellects or the agents, the prime agents. First of all, the universal intellect, which obviously occurs in the realm of Lahut, that divine realm proper. Then from there emerges the realm of the universal soul, which technically can be argued to be starting at the level of the Jabarut itself, right? And then extending all the way into the realm of the Malakut. And then from that, probably the lowest level of the or the lower levels of the imaginal world in the realm of Malakut, we can then say that the universe, that is the hypostasis of the universal nature, starts to make itself felt, where the taint of nature, as Ibn Arabi says, starts to showcase everything in its dualism.
Right. The taint, did you say?
Yeah, that's what he says. That's the way he calls it, taint of nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And Insan al-Kamil is the lowest
Yeah.
the lowest
This
level.
is these guys usually call it the five divine presences. If you look at Ibn Arabi himself, there's actually six divine presences, not five. The sixth being the Insan Kamil. And Ibn Arabi is very explicit that the number six itself is the number of the Insan Kamil.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay.
we have the ipsiety, we have the divinity, we have the Empyrean, we have the angelic realm, we have the material realm, and then the Insan Kamil is the sixth, that is the mirror of all of them. And six is his number or her number.
Nice.
So,
Or her.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, Ibn Arabi is very open to women being, the complete humans. No, he's doesn't discriminate whatsoever.
No, no, and in fact, you just reminded me of your I'm not sure if it's where what was it? The theory of the pentagram basically having the 5 points, but the six
Is the inner, yeah,
right.
the 6 point
And
of the ring, yeah.
somehow, for some reason, correct me if I'm wrong, but not that I'm trying to gender it, but I see the five as I see one being a male principle and the other being a female principle.
Yeah.
If that
Or
makes sense.
there's another way you can frame it. You can frame it in Jungian terms. The outer aspect is the animus, and the inner aspect is the anima.
Right, right. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Thank you very much. That helps a lot.
No worries. Any more questions? All right. Well, then for next week, let's
Just
start
a last one, if you allow me to add.
Yeah.
There are also many practical advices in the chapter of imaginal world, how to distinguish between false images and images which have reality and so on and so forth. But the one thing which I think for most crucial when he explaining the dreams in a sleep state and also the visions in when we are awaking, he's saying that It depends when you have your vision. Are you directly connected to the المثال المطلق, the absolute imaginal world, of you are still in the limits of المثال المقيد, your own imaginal world? If the case is the first, then what you are seeing it's definitely true. It represents reality. But in second case, if you are still in the limits of your المثال المقيد, limited imaginal world, then it can be true, but also can be false.
Yes, but let's bracket that true and falseness by what Ibn Arabi tells us in the chapter of Joseph about the khiyal itself. Everything is khiyal. The whole of existence is khiyal, with the khiyal fil khiyal fil khiyal, right? So even your muqayyadi vision of the of the imaginal is itself true, albeit it is true only on that delimited circumscribed level related to yourself. It may not have a veracity beyond you, but it has a veracity to you. And now something that is true to you and may not necessarily be true outside of you has the capacity to destabilize you in terms of what you are seeing and what is the correlation outside. And this is why they frame it sometimes in these texts as the whisperings of the devil, right? Because for a very simple reason, because if a certain vision, we're saying all of these imaginings are true, but when it is flowing from the absolute imagination, this is the totality. So it then marks and anchors itself in things that also occur outside of you. But when it is something that is only related to you alone, right? If you don't have the discernment to properly then make that distinction between what is applicable to you and what is applicable universally, that is where then certain of the base emotions will always kick in. Mind, I know better, blah blah, insistent, the ego, that nafs al-amara will kick in every time as a possessive agent of that very vision. And so this is why they say it is satanic, because of that function. But a Gnostic that has progressed has the ability to analyze and understand and identify their own subjectivity and distinguish their own subjectivity from a greater objectivity around what is coming out of the absolute imagination of God itself. But ultimately, even your khiyal and mughayyad is still a particle. It's one of those drops that is dropping from the river of life from the wing of Gabriel itself. It has a truth, even though it may not, have a truth beyond it.
Okay, that helps much. Thank you very much.
No worries. No worries at all. No worries. Okay, let's read for next week the 7th chapter of this, the degrees of unveiling and its main types, Narrative al-Kashf and Wahwa Ijmala, this is going to be a very important, lengthy discussion because it especially ties into what we just talked about in the last chapter on the imaginal world. So exactly what are we seeing? Especially those of us who are wavering, what are we actually perceiving? How do we, are these hallucinations? The common term that you find in contemporary psychology or psychiatry, this whole category of hallucination. What does that even mean? Some psychiatry to this day has not been able to distinguish between hallucination and vision because it doesn't accept any of the philosophical premises of epistemology. And whenever it does, it tries to frame it from a very narrow Kantian perspective. And they have found, I've had this debate with countless psychiatrists, and they can't formulate a coherent theory and distinction between vision and hallucination. But in this next chapter, we will get into this next week on chapter 7. So just, be aware of what he just said in the last chapter in this upcoming chapter number 7 that we'll cover next week. And so we'll leave it here for today, for these two chapters, and we'll come back together obviously next week for Sohrawardi, and then the following day again for this. So until next week, everybody be well. Ya haq.